Hi, welcome. I'm Ingrid Blackburn, and today I'm going to show you how to create this amazing scenic card using the Stampscapes stamps, the Color Box Stylus tool, and the ink swipe technique. So let's get started. This is going to be an amazing project, and you really have to kind of think it through before you get started. We're going to create a window. We're using this snowflake die from the Festive Flurry framelit set by Stampin' Up, but any snowflake die will do. It doesn't have to be this particular one. And the thing is, you need a large enough die to cover your scene. So keeping that in mind, I've gone ahead and created our base, and our base is 5.5 inches by 5.5 inches. It's a square card because this is actually a relatively large die. And if we did just a traditional card, you know, that would be 4.25 inches about here, you know, it really kind of takes up the whole card. So I wanted to have a little bit more space, which just kind of helps with the overall design and feel. Now, for a greeting, I thought I would keep it relatively simple. Now, you could always stamp something right here or somewhere else on the card, but I thought that I would use the steel die by W+9. I love this die, and they do have a matching stamp set, a coordinating stamp set for this. It has the word Merry and Joy. So I have the word Joy here, and just so I have an idea of where it's going to be, that gives me an opportunity to kind of figure out where this snowflake window is going to be. So I figure that's going to be about there. And so my scene, which we're going to stamp and color on this piece of glossy cardstock, is going to be behind this piece. So I need it to go at least a little bit wider than the largest part of the snowflake if I'm positioning it this way. If I'm positioning my snowflake this way, you know, then obviously it can be a little bit shorter. But I kind of like it this way, so I think we're gonna do this here. So I know that I need my piece of paper to be at least 4.75 inches tall, which is just a little bit taller and longer than this right here. So this will be slipped behind the cutout, and you'll only see the part that has the actual snowflake window. So if we put that there, we can glue it, and we still have our card front goes beyond that, perfect. And obviously beyond here and beyond here, you won't see any of this part. This part will all be this top layer, and there's still plenty of room for our greeting. So as I'm stamping my scene, we're going to use the Lakeside Cove stamp by Stampscapes. I know that I'm going to want it positioned here because I'm also going to want to put this doe in the scene down here. So now I have an idea of where I actually want this to be and where I'm going to start my stamping. Why don't we next stamp out our landscape and start coloring. Since I use the unmounted version of the Stampscapes stamps, I don't have any foam behind mine, and to get a really nice crisp image, I use a foam pad underneath it. So I have my piece of scrap copy paper, because I'm going to stamp off my image here, off my paper here, and I'm placing my die here about where it's going to go, just so I have a visual of where to stamp my scene here. I've got my doe, which is going to be in the foreground, so that's going to be there, and I have my Memento Tuxedo black ink pad. So I'm going to ink up my stamp rather well. Now I'm going to use my stamp as a winter scene. I'm not actually going to use it as a lake. So because of that, I'm going to actually remove a lot of this, the reflection, because this is actually really meant to be water. So, but we're going to use this more as, a meadow. So I'm just taking away some of this that was inked up, and this is the reflection, the trees that we have here. And it's okay if I don't get it all, you know, I'm not going to worry about that too much, and being careful not to really go into the rocks here. And if I miss something, it's not going to be the end of the world because we're going to add a lot of color to our scene. So I know that this is going to be about here because I want to leave enough space that I can do a moon. And so we'll stamp this off our project here. I want to make sure that it goes off because that piece you're going to actually see. So I don't want to have some, you know, something that doesn't really look very natural over there. And I'm gonna give it a chance to transfer to my glossy cardstock, pick it up, and there we go, and that looks great. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a seamless transition on this side and add a little bit here. And you can see that a lot of this water and the dots, they're all gone. It's okay if I have a little bit of the reflection, because that'll just give you that feel of shadows from the light source that's gonna be back here. So that I'm not worried about. And now we're going to build our scene. So we're gonna ink up our stamp a second time, avoiding those dots again. Those dots are really just more to help ease with the transition. but we want to make sure to just take a lot of that away. Got a lot of extra ink on my block, which I just transferred to my thumb, and I don't want to get that on my cardstock. Just kind of take some of this away here. And this is really the side that you're really going to see through here, and that's the part that we're going to overlap and really transition. So I'm going to take a paper towel that I've torn in half, and that gives me these nice gradual layers here. We're just going to cover up our rocks, allowing our trees to kind of overlap. Generally you want to have about 1/4 of an inch showing. And I'm going to want to make sure these overlap enough, but I'm going to drop this down a little just to give it a little bit of a different look. Stamp. And there we go. We have that perfect transition. You see here, and that filled that gap because we had an awkward gap there. So it's as if it's just one continuous scene. And that's going to leave plenty of space. Now you want to be careful because that's really wet. We're going to need to allow that to dry. But that's going to give us plenty of space here for our dough, which we'll place right there. And right here, this is going to be, these are nice shadows for when we do our sponging. We're going to have a light source back here, so that'll just be the shadows from the trees. And right now we need to allow this to dry. We want to do any other stamping if we need to, but we're going to do the rest just using ink. And we're going to stamp our foreground at a later time. So I'm going to set this aside for about an hour, and I'll meet you back then. So now that we've allowed our scene to dry, you can either run a heat tool over it, or you can set it aside naturally to dry. You can see that the black has faded a little bit, and that's perfectly fine. We're now going to take the Color Box Stylus tools, and we're going to use some distress inks. We're going to create kind of a monochromatic scene. We're just going to use the white to our advantage, and we're going to add different layers of blue. So what I have here is I have tumbled glass, broken china, stormy sky, and chipped sapphire. We're going to pretty much start off with the tumbled glass, and I have a couple of the Color Box Stylus tools with the sponge applicators. I'm going to use this one right here and kind of create that icy look. Tumbled glass is great for creating your depth in snowbanks. I have a video on that. It's also great in creating water. It's great in creating ice. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay down a foundation, because this is glossy paper, and the Color Box Stylus is a great tool to drag along here to create some amazing imagery. But for right now, I'm using this at an angle. You can see that if I were to just put it down straight down, I'd have this big oval shape. I just want to have it on an angle, just kind of creating that kind of half moon. And I'm going to use the tip to my advantage and just kind of come in here at the base of the rocks. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of creating an icy shadow of our rocks. And we're going to come in here with a couple other shades of blue as well to help create the depth in the ice, because our light source is going to be over here, and that's going to be a moon. So it's going to be coming this direction. And that means that your shadows are going to be kind of to the front of the scene. And I don't need to worry about going all the way over here, because if you remember using our snowflake, this is going to sit over our scene about here. So I'm really only going to see as far as this whole part over here. I'm not really going to see. So I'm just going to go a little ways, not the entire way, just a little ways. Just helping to create this depth here. This is the same thing that you would do if it was water. And that would be kind of like those darker shades that you see kind of at the edge, the shadow. And then we're going to also create a little bit of a drag across some of this. I'm going to add a little on the edges. And this is our under layer. And what having the under layer does is it allows all the other colors to glide a little easier. I'm going to leave the center part white for right now. And we actually need to kind of add our doe. I think it's probably smarter if we added her now. So really, in retrospect, you'll probably stamp her at the same time that you do your scene. I'm going to go ahead and add a little more here, just kind of dragging it in. And so let me add my doe. I want to have it appear as if she's coming out of the snow or just kind of standing into the snow. So I want to get her inked up really well. And I'm going to use my paper towel here to kind of mask off the very, very bottom of her feet. But I want to also lay my snowflake down kind of where it's going to go. This way I can make sure that my doe is completely in the scene. So it's going to go about there. So I'm going to want to bring this up a little tiny bit. And we'll have the doe kind of to the forefront. So I want the bottom of her legs to be on the paper towel. So I'm just going to allow her to transfer over. And you can see that was perfect. Just the very, very bottom of her feet were on the towel, kind of giving the illusion that she's stepping into the snow. So now I got to quickly dry her. So I'm just going to use a heat tool to do that, making sure that I don't have any ink on my hands as I lift this up. It's important that she's fully dry because if you were to drag your stylus tool over her, you'd drag black if it was wet, and that you wouldn't want in your scene. So now that she's dry, we're going to add a little bit more of the blue here, kind of at her base. And what this is it's going to basically be kind of like her shadow a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of improvise here, almost creating a shadow just with this very, very tip. And I did that ever so slightly. I really did not, because if I press down, I'm going to end up getting a funky shadow or shape of my tool, and that's not really what I'm looking for. So I just want a very, very light shadow of her. Okay, let's add a little bit more down here, giving our darker colors an opportunity to glide a little bit better. So now we're going to, and it's good to just work on, I think, one portion at a time. And from here we're going to go actually into broken china. And broken china is a great way to just kind of take the depth of your light shades to another level. We'll add it first on the side and just kind of drag a little across. I want to make sure to keep a little bit of light in here, reflecting what's going to be the moon up top. The key to having a really nice drag here, like I said, was the under foundation, the undercoat. Another reason for having that is you don't want to break your tips, and if it's all dry and you're dragging constantly across the glossy paper, you're going to end up tearing, and I think I have a torn tip here somewhere so you can see. You're going to end up tearing your tip like that. Whenever you get this tool, always get a couple extra spare tips. It's just good to have. When you're first getting started out, don't be frustrated. You will end up tearing one or two until you kind of get the hang of it. Doesn't mean you still can't use them, you just have to be careful. All right, so that works. Let's just drag a little tiny bit more color in here. There we go. And then we'll move on to the stormy sky. And what I'm doing is I'm just kind of building up depth. Oh, actually I need to add a little bit of the broken china to the very, very edge here. I don't want to get rid of all of that tumbled glass, so I'm just going to be careful and just kind of add my darker blues very purposefully here at the edge. So now I'm going to move on to the Stormy Sky, which is kind of like a bluish gray color. I love Stormy Sky, another one of my favorites. And we're just going to add a little bit of the darker shadow here. I'm going to have my darkest colors towards the bottom, because that's going to be the very bottom of the snowflake. And you do want to be careful not to get rid of all of your white and not drag too much of this in. However, you have to remember that we're not going to see this side over here. So you really want to make sure that you are bringing your color in on this side. Just kind of keep in mind where that snowflake is going to start and end. And I know that this kind of feels more like water. I mean, it could be a frozen lake. It could be whatever you really want it to be. But for me, it's a nighttime moonlit scene, and that's why I'm using the blues. Just to kind of really give that moonlit evening effect. And it is winter. Took that a little too far. That's okay. That's looking pretty good. And I'm going to hold off on the Chipped Sapphire, the darkest blue, until we have our sky done. So now that I have that, and I managed to keep quite a bit of the white, which is good, now I'm going to add my sky. Now, keeping in mind where all this is where I kind of want to keep my moon up here. So we'll start off with the lighter shades, and that would be the tumbled glass. It's broken china. So this is tumbled glass. The sky is a little easier for me. It's not as much close detail that you have to pay attention to. Just kind of making sure that I get this all along the tree line, the base of the tree line. And then we'll just add some of our sky here. Remember, you want to keep that center white. Could have also flecked some masking fluid on here if you wanted this to be a snowy scene, you know, as given the illusion that it's snowing. You can also do that with the white gel pen. We will add highlights with the white gel pen. And it looks like my very, very tip of my tree was not 100% dry there. You can see it dragged a little tiny bit of the black, which is a little surprising, as I did wait. Just give that a quick little zap. And then we will add a little more of the tumbled glass. There we go. Okay, so the center right here is white, and then we're adding the blue. You want to make sure to go pretty high because the very top of your snowflake goes almost to the end of this paper. Not quite to the end. Stops about 1/8 of an inch short. Now this technique is something that you just have to practice. What I did when I first started with the ink swipe technique was really more of just creating, just with random colors, creating a sunset. And I didn't have anything stamped down. I just worked on my technique of just dragging. So what you're doing is you're adding a little bit of ink here, you're getting a good enough foundation, and then you're just slowly swiping that color in. Now, ink really matters here, the different types of ink that you use. I'm using distress inks. Distress inks move fairly freely. Ranger also has the Adirondack Lights. Now these are retired, but you may have these, or you may have, or the Adirondack Brights. You may have, you know, the reinkers for them. Those would work great as well. The Marvy matchable pads, which also are retired in the United States. However, you still have the brush markers available in the US, same ink, and you also have the reinkers for these available. You can create your own ink pads. These are awesome to do this technique with. They're definitely my favorite, but I wanted to use the distress inks because I know these are pretty current for everybody, and a lot of people really do have these already. So, but those are the best. Stampin' Up! Inks, I'll be honest with you, they don't work very well with this technique. You will need to have, the way that you can use them is if you're just doing regular sponging or using them in a more traditional way. You can use the Stampin' Up! Inks if you have something else that's a little thicker to give you that foundation. I would use a lot of Distress as a foundation. These would actually be better, or the Marvy as a foundation. You need that light color to allow those Stampin' Up! Inks to glide. They dry so fast that you will end up tearing your tips. So I just caution you to be aware of that when you're trying this for the first time. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to the broken china. There are a lot of other inks out there that you can try. I haven't really tried the Hero Arts or, you know, any of the Simon Says stamp pads. So definitely let me know if you try it with any of those and they work really well. So I'm just going to add this. We don't want to go over all of our tumble glass, but we want to kind of add, you know, some depth and some interest here in the sky. Something that's going to start to create that wintry feel a little bit more. Now we'll move on to the stormy sky. Like I said, this is a great shade. It's good for water and sky. And it's also good for your deeper tones and snow. You know, when you're adding, you know, if you ever watch the how to create snowdrifts video that I made, I'll put a link to that here. If you ever watch that, you know, you're going to take some of these darker shades and you're going to start to build upon each other, just in the same principle, really, like the ink swipe technique. You're using the different textures of the colors and the values to really build that depth into what it is that you're showing, the shadows, or, you know, the variation in the sky. It's really beautiful when you start to do that rather than being more one-dimensional and only using one color. So here, just to get an idea, I always like to do this with my die just so I know whether or not I need to drag in a color a little tiny bit more. And it looks like I do right up here, just kind of in just a little bit more. Let's see how that looks. That's a little better. Just add a little tiny bit more. Feels like I'm going into the white a little too much, but I guess not, based off where that is. Okay, so now that I have that, it's looking pretty monochromatic there. You know, it's all kind of similar. Now we're going to add the Chip Sapphire. And the Chip Sapphire is a really dark color. It's probably Ranger's best answer to a navy blue. And so we're going to add this primarily on the edge. You want to be careful about dragging it too far into your scene. I'm going to start with the sky. And pulling it in, I'm really only going to keep it at the rock line. Just a little bit here, mostly on the edge, but a little bit in. Because this will just overpower all those other shades. And what you're really looking for is just the built up texture from the different hues. And that looks pretty good. You still see a lot of that stormy sky and broken china. And I'm going to need a little bit right up here. And I think what I'd like to do is just add a little bit of the broken china. Anytime I use distress, I like to come back in with some of the lighter shades. It helps to blend everything together, and it just kind of makes it all work really well. There we go. A little bit more depth right there. And that's good, because you can see that that's what you're going to see is right there. Now I'm not going to worry too much about getting a little bit on the rocks. If you really are worried about that, you can always mask them with masking fluid. But we're going to come in with a white gel pen once we've colored those and add some highlights to them. So now we're going to add the chipped sapphire to the bottom. Be careful here on the side not to add too much. Just want to kind of create that frame. We want to just add a little bit in here for that shadow, and we'll come back in here. Don't think I added enough stormy sky in here for the shadow. And these are really a lot of fun. Stampscapes is a great line to work with. You can really build, I mean, this is really almost like a simple scape, but you can really build some amazing scenes with this. I do have a thread on my blog that you can check out, and I'll link to my blog right here. And you can just check out all the Stampscapes cards that I have on there, and I have even more, you know, in a class. It's just, they're just so much fun. I can't stop using them. I always feel like an artist when I use them. So now I'm going to check this against the snowflake here. And it looks like I need to just bring a little bit more of the darkness in there and add a little bit more to the top and bottom. A little bit more here, making this even darker, and this kind of helps to frame it. We're just looking to add a little bit here, giving it that a little bit more of a finishing touch. I think we did a pretty good job of retaining the light to help with the sparkle of this card, because that's important. This card is being created for a challenge, and the keyword for Happy Little Stampers Christmas Card Challenge, the keyword on this challenge is sparkle. So we want to make sure to have enough light so that we can show some sparkle. And that's looking pretty good. Now what I'm going to do here with my dough is I'm going to actually add a little bit of the tumble glass at this point. And I have just a Q-tip here that I've just kind of pulled off, and I'm just going to very lightly just add a little bit more tumble glass here around the hooves, kind of helping to show that she really is stepping into the snow. And we'll add a little bit more here, just kind of helping with that shadow. That worked really well. You know, tumble glass is another great one that you can use to help develop shadows as well. You know, on a hill, anywhere you need it. I don't think we really need it because by having those kind of shadows from the trees right there, that works in our favor. So now we're going to color in our rocks, and we're going to use that same Q-tip. On the reverse side, I have a little bit of pumice stone, just kind of like a brownish gray, a little more on the warm brown side. I'm just going to come in here and color in my rocks. You can definitely do this with the tip of the stylus tool as well, but some of these are really small and I'd like to be a little more precise. So I'm just going to come in here and color them all. And then when I'm done with this, we're going to add some white in the form of a gel pen for a little bit of snow. So next we're going to add some highlights. I have two white gel pens. This is the Uniball Signo gel pen, and this is a hybrid gel pen, and this is by Pentel. So we're going to start off by adding just some snow onto our rocks. So I'm just gonna kind of just draw some lines here. You can also add them in the form of dots, but I'd like to have a fair amount of coverage on my rocks. You can also go a little at the base if you'd like, and we're going to also add a little bit of some frozen feel to these little grasses that are there as well. When using a gel pen, you know, dots and dashes are really kind of what you want to do. It's very easy to add more. You can't take it away. So you see here, by adding several little dots, I kind of create what the feel that I'm going for here. Kind of those frozen rocks. So now I'm just going to add different streaks here for the frozen reeds or frozen grasses. Come in here a little bit more. And then I'm just going to check it against my snowflake just to make sure that I've covered enough. And it looks like I just need to just come over here just a little bit more. So now that we've added our snow to our rocks, we're going to add some dots in the trees just for a little bit of sparkle, kind of highlighting. And I do this in the form of little dots. And then when you come along the trunks, I like to add a little bit more. It's almost as if it could be frost too, or as if it's a fresh snow. Whatever feel you're going for. But the key to doing this is you just want to be a little bit more random, and you don't want to overdo it either. You also want to make sure that your white gel pen is flowing pretty good. I find that I need to keep several on hand. I actually have about 6 of the Uniball pens, and I just purchased a couple of those Pentel gel pens. So, because on a given day, for some reason, some work and some don't. They're kind of a tricky little pens for me sometimes. And I really need one that flows well in order to do this properly. like I said, you also don't want to have everything look so uniform. So get in the habit of kind of jumping around your scene, and that will help you to not keep everything the same on every single tree or in the sky. Kind of move around, and I find that when I move around, then I kind of fill it in a little bit more of a natural space and a natural way. But this is really something that really adds a lot of life and realism to your scene. And from here, we're going to move into the sky and create some stars as well. So now that we've added the highlights in our tree, and let me zoom in so that you can see this a little bit better, or pick this up, the camera focus there. You can kind of see where all the lines were, just showing as if those trunks are a little frozen. Maybe we'll add one in here. A little bit more. And that helps lend to the frosty feel of the scene. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add just some little dots here in the snow, as if we have little reflective surfaces. You can also add a little bit of snow here more at the edge of your rocks. Just for a little bit more of a frosty feel. I'm going to add these in little groups. You can also add some little dashes as well. It doesn't always have to be little dots, although groups of dots are probably your friend here. I'm going to add a little bit right to the top part of the legs, because you're going to remember your light source is coming from this way, so it wouldn't make sense to have shine from the back side. A little bit there. A little on the top. And there we go. You could also add some stars. I want to keep these in some groups. And then we'll have a couple of stars that are a little bit more pronounced, kind of like a North Star. And then what we'll do is we will take a Q-tip, and I have a color box frost white pad. We're going to want to loosen this up a little. Let's zoom back out a little. So we got to loosen this up a little. And we'll pick up some of this pigment. This is pigment ink, so it's a very wet ink. I'm going to tap a lot of this out off onto your scrap paper, and you're just going to very lightly just tap on here, and that's going to give you that star. A little bit more of a pronounced star. We'll do one more. Let's just get an idea of where. Might have even done that in a space where you can't even see it. So let's do this one. You can see why it was so important to actually bring your dye back into it, because you can very easily do work that won't even be seen, or really miss an area that could use some color. So be sure to work your dye back into your scene just like this, so that you can kind of see exactly where you're doing and where you might need to add something. And I think what we need to do is we need to add a couple more stars down here, since seeing where that is, you're not really going to see any of them. It's important to have, in a nighttime scene like this, it's important to have light, because without light you're not going to have sparkle, and that's the whole point of the scene, is to have the sparkle. See, I'm just going to lay this down on top and see if there's anywhere that I want to maybe just add a couple dots. A little more snow. A couple more stars. It's good to step back and evaluate your scene as you're going, just to kind of stop, pause, look. Really important to kind of help you with these finishing touches to give it a realistic feel. And there we go. So now that we have our scene completed, you could always add a little bit of glue with some glitter as well. But what we're going to do is we're going to actually use glitter to our advantage on the top piece rather than on this scene right here. Here are some close-up transitions for you so you can see how this scene progressed from beginning to end. Thanks so much for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you in the second half of this video where we bring the entire project together. And of course, if you enjoyed it, be sure to give me a thumbs up. You can sign up for our newsletter by going to my blog, and we have great project details there if you're looking for the exact dimensions and supplies that I use for this project. And I hope to see you in another video shortly.